The phone rang through the darkness. Its piercing sound tore through the stillness of the living room. I jolted awake in the old armchair. A familiar stab of pain shot through my left knee as I tried to move. The wall clock struck 2 o'clock in the morning. On the phone screen, the name Emily flashed over and over. My daughter. I picked up the phone, but before I could say a word, Emily's voice burst through, rapid and filled with panic. "Dad, why is your face on every news station?" I didn't answer right away. I looked up at the old television that was still on in front of me. It was replaying the breaking news report over and over. The screen showed an elderly man, his face covered with snow and blood, helping terrified passengers out of an overturned bus. That man was me. Across the bottom of the screen, the headline read, "Hero in the Blizzard." "Dad, are you even listening to me? Social media is exploding because of you." Emily's voice cracked over the phone. I let out a quiet sigh and leaned back against the chair. The contrast was almost laughable. On that television screen I was a strong hero, praised by millions. But here in this room I was just a lonely old man. An old man who had just endured an exhausting night. An old man whose aching knee hurt so badly that he couldn't even stand on his own to get a glass of water. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. I'm a hero in the blizzard, and I'm also an old man my own daughter banned from coming to her house on Christmas Eve. Leave a comment with the number 1 so I can tell you this whole story. Hit subscribe, and trust me, you're going to love this story. I took a deep breath. Silence lingered between the two ends of the line. On the other side, Emily began breathing faster, unable to hide the anxiety in every breath. My daughter was afraid, but she wasn't afraid for my safety. She was panicking because she knew her own standing and her husband's were about to be shaken by public opinion. "I only did what needed to be done, Emily," I replied as calmly as I could. "No resentment, no anger, only emptiness. But Dad, everyone is trying to find out who you are. Reporters are calling Gary. They're asking why a hero like you was volunteering alone on Christmas Eve. Do you have any idea how this affects my family?" I said nothing. I looked at my swollen, reddened knee under the dim glow of the television. I got this injury trying to pry open the bus window to save Eleanor. It hurt, but that physical pain was nothing compared to the coldness in my own daughter's words. Just 3 days earlier, this very same voice had begged me not to show up at the family gathering. Today, that same voice was blaming me for becoming the center of media attention. They cared about Gary's reputation. They cared about saving face. And I, the father who had spent his whole life protecting Emily, had become nothing more than an inconvenience during the holiday meant for family. "I understand," I said quietly before hanging up. I didn't wait for Emily to explain anything else. I set the phone down on the table. The room returned to its familiar silence. The steady hum of the refrigerator in the corner of the kitchen only made the loneliness feel deeper. I closed my eyes and let the light from the television wash over my weathered face. The blizzard outside had passed, but the storm inside my heart had only just begun. My mind drifted back 3 days earlier. It was late in the afternoon, and snow had just begun to fall outside the front porch. I was dusting off old cardboard boxes in the storage room. That was when Emily called. Back then, my daughter's voice wasn't panicked like it was now. It was hesitant, avoidant. "Dad, this Christmas. Could you not come to my house?" I froze. The strand of tinsel in my hand slipped to the floor. I said nothing. The silence stretched so long that I could hear the wind whistling through the crack in the window. I waited for a reason, a reasonable explanation for such a heartless request. "What do you mean, Emily?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Gary. He wants a real Christmas with just his own family. He just married me, and he needs to feel like he's part of this home. Besides, Mom's new husband will be there too. If you come, everyone will feel uncomfortable." I finally understood the biggest reason I wasn't welcome. It was because my ex-wife's new husband would be there. I looked down at the cardboard box by my feet. Inside were old keepsakes, a clay angel with one chipped wing, a snowman made from popsicle sticks glued together with messy streaks of dried paste. Emily had made them for me when she was 7 years old. My daughter used to tell me they were priceless treasures, but when she moved into her new home with Gary, she threw them straight into the trash. I picked them back up. I had cherished them ever since. And now, that same daughter wanted to throw away my very presence as well. "Gary just needs time. Please understand, Dad," Emily continued. Her words were gentle, but as sharp as a razor. I didn't say anything. I stared out the window. My house was so quiet that I could hear the refrigerator humming. My silence made Emily uneasy. She didn't ask how I was going to spend Christmas. She didn't care what a lonely old man would eat on a holiday night. The only thing she wanted was for me to say yes so her conscience could rest. "All right. I won't come," I replied. "Thank you, Dad. You're always the best." Emily let out a relieved sigh before hurriedly hanging up. The best. Those words sounded painfully ironic. I turned off my phone and sat motionless among memories covered in dust. I had spent my entire life trying to be a good father. I worked 2 extra jobs at the same time to put my daughter through college. I personally fixed every light fixture and repainted every wall when she bought her new house. Yet in the end, my place in my daughter's life was so easily replaced by a man who had been there for less than 1 year. Gary needed to feel like family, but didn't I? I bent down and carefully packed the keepsakes back into the box. My knee throbbed again. It was an old injury from my younger days that flared up whenever the weather turned cold, but that physical pain was nothing compared to the chill spreading through my chest. I decided I wouldn't sit there and suffer through the loneliness. I opened a drawer and took out an old leather-bound album. It held 30 years of memories between my daughter and me. I turned the pages one by one, looking at Emily's radiant smile as a little girl. I smiled too, a bitter smile. I would bring this final gift to my daughter on Christmas Eve. I wanted Gary and Emily to see with their own eyes everything they had chosen to forget. But I never imagined that my journey through the blizzard would lead me to another horrifying secret. The old leather photo album rested neatly in my hands. The weight of 30 years of memories pressed against my weathered fingers. I turned the pages one by one. Here was a picture of Emily grinning with a gap-toothed smile as she received her first bicycle. Here was the photograph of her in her graduation gown, throwing her arms around my neck and crying. Those moments had once been my entire world. Now they were nothing more than fragments of a past that had been rejected. The life of a single man past 60 was actually very simple. So simple it was frightening. I woke before dawn. I reheated leftovers from the night before. I gave half of the meat to my old dog Buster, who lay at my feet. He was the only living soul in this house who still listened when I spoke. "We're having a visitor today, Buster," I whispered. The old dog gently wagged his tail, the soft thump against the floor echoing with loneliness. The house was so quiet that I could hear the refrigerator humming. Every tiny sound seemed amplified in the empty space. As Christmas drew near, every house on the street glowed with lights and laughter drifted over from the neighbors. As for me, all I had were 4 walls and endless stretches of silence. Loneliness isn't being by yourself. Loneliness is knowing you have a family, yet they choose happiness without you. I slipped the album into a red gift bag lined with tissue paper. Then I carefully tied a beautiful ribbon around it. This would be the last gift I ever prepared for Emily with my own hands. I didn't want to compete with Gary. I didn't want to put my beloved daughter in an uncomfortable position. I only wanted to return to her what had always belonged to her before I truly learned how to let go. I wanted them to understand that a father's love was not something to be pushed aside whenever it became inconvenient. I put on my heavy coat and wrapped the old wool scarf around my neck. Emily had knitted it for me years ago. The yarn was worn thin, but it was the only thing keeping me warm now. I looked around the room one last time. Everything was ready. My old car had a full tank of gas. Outside, the snow was falling harder, warning that a major blizzard was moving toward the city. I stepped outside and my left knee throbbed with another sharp burst of pain. I gritted my teeth and walked straight into the freezing night. I drove into the blizzard, heading toward Emily's house. My plan was simply to leave the gift quietly on her doorstep and drive away. But fate always has turns no one can foresee. As my car turned onto the main highway leading toward the suburbs, my headlights swept across a strange, dark shape on the shoulder of the road. It wasn't an ordinary snowdrift. The strange, dark shape on the side of the road turned out to be nothing more than a large tree branch that had snapped under the weight of the snow. I let out a sigh of relief and pressed the gas pedal, continuing my journey. The blizzard grew fiercer with every mile. Thick snowflakes slammed relentlessly against the windshield. My old car shuddered beneath the force of the howling wind. The ache in my left knee began to throb again. It had always been like a terrible weather forecast. But I didn't turn back. I had something I needed to do. After more than an hour of fighting the icy roads, I finally reached Emily's neighborhood. My daughter's 2-story house appeared through the curtain of white snow. Warm golden light glowed from the living room windows. I could see silhouettes moving inside. They were laughing together. Cheerful Christmas music drifted faintly through the cracks of my car door. There was warmth in that house. There was love. There was Gary. There just wasn't any room for me. I parked a good distance away. I didn't want my headlights disturbing their celebration. I picked up the red gift bag and stepped out of the car. The icy wind rushed into my face, nearly stealing my breath. I walked one painful step at a time through the deep snow. My aching knee made every step feel like torture. I was like a thief sneaking quietly through my own family's holiday. I stepped onto the porch. Gary's laughter rang clearly from inside the house. He was telling some kind of joke. Emily laughed loudly. That laughter had once belonged to me. I bent down and placed the red tissue gift bag containing the photo album filled with 30 years of memories beside the front door. I stood there for several seconds staring at the doorknob. I could have knocked. I could have demanded my place as her father. But the pride of an old man held my hand still. They didn't need me. My presence would have been nothing more than an act of pity. I turned around and walked away. The falling snow quickly erased my footprints from the porch. I returned to my car, my whole body trembling from the cold. I didn't start the engine right away. I sat there in the darkness, looking toward the house overflowing with happiness. I pulled out my phone and played an old video from 15 years ago. In it, little Emily wobbled on her very first bicycle. She fell and burst into tears. I ran over, helped her back to her feet, and said, "Dad's always here. Don't be afraid." I turned off the screen. My tears mixed with the melting snow on my cheeks. I tried to tell myself that my daughter had grown up, that she had a life of her own. But the truth was that I was lying to myself. I had been pushed aside. I drove away from the neighborhood, my heart as empty and frozen as the world outside. I decided to drive to the town's volunteer relief center. I needed something to take my mind off the pain. The highway was completely deserted, with only my car moving through the blizzard. As I rounded the dangerous curve near the canyon, my headlights suddenly swept across a horrifying scene. A large passenger bus lay overturned on its side, dangerously close to the edge of the deep ravine. Black smoke poured from beneath the hood. Desperate screams echoed through the howling wind. The bus lay on its side against the blanket of white snow. My headlights illuminated the devastating scene. Thick black smoke billowed from underneath the vehicle. Desperate cries for help tore through the freezing night. Without a second of hesitation, I slammed on the brakes and pulled onto the shoulder. I forgot all about the pain in my knee. The instincts of a retired firefighter surged back to life inside me. I jumped out of my car and ran straight toward the bus. The wind-driven snow lashed against my face. The freezing air blurred my vision. Through the dim lights inside the overturned bus, I saw dozens of terrified passengers trapped behind thick glass. The only emergency exit at the front had been completely crushed by the impact. I glanced around and grabbed a bent steel bar lying in the snow. With every ounce of strength I had left, I swung it against the side window. Once, twice. The tempered glass splintered before exploding into hundreds of pieces. Jagged shards sliced across the back of my hand, and blood immediately poured out, staining the snow crimson. I didn't feel the pain. I grabbed the edge of the broken window and pulled myself up to look inside. "Stay calm, one at a time. Give me your hand," I shouted, my voice cutting through the howl of the storm. The first person I reached was an elderly woman with silver hair, her face drained of color from fear. Her name was Eleanor. She was clutching a small child tightly in her arms. I leaned in carefully, took the child from her first, and set the little one down safely on the snow. Then I reached back and gripped Eleanor's hand. The force of pulling her free sent a violent jolt of pain through my left knee. It felt as though the joint was splitting apart. I clenched my teeth, swallowing the groan rising in my throat, and used every bit of strength in my shoulders to pull her out of the cramped wreckage. "Thank you, sir. Please save the others," Eleanor whispered, shivering uncontrollably from the cold and the shock. I nodded. Then I turned back to the shattered window. One person, then another, then 5 more. I lost count of how many hands I pulled through that opening. My fingertips went numb from the freezing cold and the blood. My knee buckled several times on the icy ground, but I forced myself back to my feet every time. In that life and death moment, I realized something. These complete strangers were clinging to me as though I were their only chance to survive. They needed me. They treasured the life I was helping them hold on to. The warmth in their tearful words of gratitude filled the hollow emptiness inside me. My own daughter had pushed me out of her Christmas celebration, yet fate had brought me here to become the lifeline for dozens of desperate strangers. The wail of ambulances and police sirens echoed through the storm. The rescue crews had finally arrived. I stepped back and collapsed onto the deep snow, completely exhausted. My clothes were soaked through. Blood, sweat, and melting snow blended together. I looked at the bus, now surrounded and secured by emergency responders, and felt an overwhelming sense of relief. I intended to quietly return to my car and drive home, but just as I managed to stand, a rough hand suddenly grabbed my shoulder from behind. A strange man's voice, heavy with the scent of expensive wine, exploded with anger. It was a voice I never could have imagined hearing under circumstances like these. The man standing behind me was no stranger. He was a middle-aged bus driver with a face flushed bright red, reeking of alcohol. He had just crawled out of the front cab of the overturned bus. He wasn't worried about the passengers. He didn't thank me. The very first thing he did was grab me by the collar and scream at me. He wanted to pin the entire accident on my old car. The police stepped in immediately. They pulled the drunken driver away from me, wrestled him to the ground, and handcuffed him. I let out a weary sigh and turned to leave. But suddenly camera flashes exploded in front of my eyes. A group of reporters from a local television station had arrived at the scene without me noticing. They surrounded me with microphones and television cameras. A young reporter, her eyes filled with admiration, held a microphone toward me. She bombarded me with questions about my courageous rescue of 15 people. I stood there, covered in snow and blood. My knee trembled from exhaustion. I didn't want to be a hero. I was just an old man with nowhere to go on Christmas Eve. "Sir, what made you drive down this isolated highway during such a terrible snowstorm?" the reporter asked emotionally. "Your family must be waiting at home to celebrate Christmas with you, right?" I remained silent for a few moments. Then I looked straight into the television camera. I thought about Emily. I thought about Gary. I thought about the two-story house glowing with warm golden lights where they had shut the door on me. I didn't want to lie, and I no longer had the strength to keep protecting them by hiding the truth. A strange sense of calm settled over me. "No," I answered evenly, my voice steady and clear. "No one's waiting for me. My daughter told me not to come this year. She wanted to make room for her new husband. So I went out to volunteer instead." The interview lasted less than 20 seconds. I nodded, politely turned around, and walked back to my car, leaving the reporters standing there in stunned silence. I drove home through the quiet darkness of the storm. I cleaned myself up, bandaged the cuts on my hand, and went to bed. I had absolutely no idea that those 20 seconds had already been uploaded to social media before the night was over. By the following morning, my life had been turned completely upside down. The video of the abandoned father who rescued people during a blizzard exploded across the internet. Millions of views, hundreds of thousands of shares. A tidal wave of public outrage began to build. People online started digging for the identities of the heartless daughter and her selfish new husband. That was what led to Emily's panicked phone call at 2 o'clock in the morning. But the story didn't end there. When I woke up the next morning and started making myself a cup of coffee, someone knocked on my door with urgent force. I opened it. Standing in front of me wasn't a crowd of reporters. Instead, a powerful-looking woman stepped out of a luxury car. She looked at me with sharp, unwavering eyes and made an offer that would change everything. The woman standing at my front door was Linda, my ex-wife. The woman who had left me more than 10 years earlier to chase a life of wealth and luxury. Standing beside her was Gary, my new son-in-law, dressed in an expensive, tailored suit. But the smug confidence he usually wore was gone. His face had turned pale. Without waiting for permission, they pushed past me and walked into my house. "David, you have to make a public statement immediately," Linda shouted angrily. "Do you have any idea what that video is doing to Gary's career? His company is being boycotted because people online figured out who we are." Calmly, I poured hot water into my coffee mug. I didn't even look at them. The gentle sound of the boiling water was the only answer to Linda's outrage. The house was so quiet that I could hear the refrigerator humming. The contrast between their frantic panic and my silence was like an invisible wall. "Dad, please," Gary said, taking a hesitant step forward. His voice trembled. He forced a smile, a pitifully fake one. "It was all just a misunderstanding. Emily loves you very much. We only wanted what was best for you. Reporters are surrounding my office right now. My reputation, Emily's future. Everything depends on one thing you say." I set the kettle down. Then I turned and looked him straight in the eyes. This newcomer had never treated me like a father. 3 days earlier he had stood beside Emily while they pushed me out of their lives. Now that his executive position was under threat, he had humbled himself enough to beg me for help. I only told the truth, I answered quietly. No anger. No raised voice. Emily told me not to come, so I didn't. But you didn't have to say it on television. Linda slammed her hand against the table. You're doing this to get revenge on your own daughter, aren't you? You're unbelievably selfish. I looked at Linda. This woman had never understood me. I wasn't taking revenge. I had simply stopped covering for their mistakes. I glanced out the window at their luxury car parked in my driveway. They arrived in an expensive vehicle. They wore designer clothes, yet their hearts were desperately poor. They worried about public opinion. They worried about money. Not once had either of them asked why my knee was swollen or whether I had treated the cuts on my hand. Gary's phone rang again. He glanced at the screen before looking back at me with pleading eyes. Dad, the mayor just called me. They want to hold a ceremony at the Civic Center tomorrow to honor you as a courageous citizen. They've requested that our whole family be there for the media coverage. This is our only chance to restore our reputation. Will you come with us and say something good about me? I smiled. A small, quiet smile. If you've made it this far, I hope you've found this story interesting. Please help us with one small favor that only takes a second. Like and subscribe. Leave a comment with the number 5 so I'll know you stayed with me until this point, and include the name of your hometown as well. So many people watch without doing that, but it costs you nothing and means the world to us. All right, I said softly. I'll attend the ceremony. Gary and Linda both let out long sighs of relief. They thought they had manipulated the lonely old man one more time. They hurried away to prepare for the ceremony the next day, convinced that all their problems had been solved. What they didn't know was that I wasn't going to the Civic Center to save their reputation. I was going there to give them a belated Christmas gift they would never forget for the rest of their lives. The Civic Center auditorium was packed. Brilliant stage lights shone directly onto the podium. The murmur of hundreds of spectators and the clicking of reporters' cameras filled the air with a suffocating tension. I sat in the front row wearing the only suit I owned, an old worn one. My left knee throbbed beneath the fabric of my trousers. The injury from the night of the blizzard still hadn't healed, but I no longer cared. Seated beside me were Emily and Gary. They wore their finest clothes. Gary kept straightening his tie, forcing a confident smile every time a camera pointed his way. Every so often he patted me warmly on the shoulder, pretending we were the picture of a loving father and son-in-law. Emily sat with her head lowered, her hands trembling as they clutched the edge of her dress. My daughter was terrified of public opinion, yet she still believed my speech would save everything. And now please give a warm welcome to our town's hero, Mr. David, the master of ceremonies announced proudly. Thunderous applause echoed throughout the auditorium. I gripped the armrest of my chair and slowly rose to my feet. My aching knee forced me to pause for a few seconds before I found my balance. Gary reached out as if to help me, but I gently brushed his hand aside. I walked to the stage on my own. Every step was slow but steady. I stood behind the microphone and looked out over the audience. From the front row, Gary nodded at me, silently urging me to deliver the carefully rehearsed statement that would restore his image. The mayor stepped forward, presented me with a certificate of recognition and a large bouquet of flowers, then patted me on the shoulder. Mr. David, he said, into the microphone, your actions were truly extraordinary. During that terrible blizzard, while facing the line between life and death, what was the hardest part for you? The entire auditorium fell silent. Every person held their breath. They expected an inspiring story about courage, about sacrifice. I lowered my eyes to the bouquet in my hands. Then I looked directly at Gary and Emily. A deep calm settled over me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I simply spoke the truth in my quiet, steady voice. The hardest part was realizing that my own daughter believed someone else deserved my place more than I did. A terrifying silence swept across the Civic Center. The whispers disappeared. The smile on Gary's face froze completely. His pale complexion flushed crimson with humiliation. Emily slowly looked up, tears streaming uncontrollably down her cheeks. My words weren't loud. They weren't cruel. But they carried the weight of 1,000 pounds, shattering every carefully crafted attempt to repair their reputation. That night I continued calmly into the microphone. I wasn't looking for glory. I left home because my house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming. I left because I no longer had a place in my own family. But the strangers on that bus reminded me that I still had value. I placed the bouquet on the podium. Then I turned around and walked away. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't look back at Linda, or Gary, or Emily. I had given them the one thing they could never argue with: the truth. I walked out of the auditorium and the cold air outside cleared my mind. I knew that after today, Emily's and Gary's lives would become even more difficult. The sweetest form of revenge isn't violence, it's the truth. But just as I reached the parking lot, a police cruiser suddenly sped in and blocked my path. A police officer stepped out, his expression grave. He hadn't come to congratulate me. The police officer walked toward me. He didn't reach for his handcuffs. Instead, he stood at attention and gave me a formal salute. The seriousness on his face quickly softened into a smile filled with respect. "Mr. David, I'm here to escort you home safely. Reporters have surrounded the rear exit. The mayor wants to make sure our town's hero isn't disturbed." I let out a quiet sigh of relief and nodded my thanks. I climbed into the patrol car and left the civic center behind as the commotion echoed in the distance. I knew that from the moment I stepped off that stage, my life had taken a different path. I had finally drawn a clear boundary. I was no longer the father who quietly endured everything, always willing to compromise for a few scraps of affection from his daughter. The next day, Emily came to my house alone. Gary wasn't with her. Her face looked exhausted and her eyes were swollen from crying all night. The public outrage had engulfed their lives. Gary's company had suspended him from work in an attempt to calm the growing boycott. Emily sat across from me, her fingers tightly intertwined. The house was so quiet that I could hear the refrigerator humming. The silence between father and daughter became almost unbearable. "Dad, I'm sorry," Emily sobbed. "I know I was wrong. I was selfish for listening to Gary. Now he's about to lose his job. The bank also denied our loan for the down payment on our new car because Gary's credit has been affected. Could you lend us the money just until we get through this crisis?" I looked at my daughter. Even now, when she had come to apologize, her true purpose was still money. And Gary. She still wanted to mine my forgiveness simply because we shared the same blood. I gently rubbed my aching left knee. The pain felt like a reminder to myself. I had sacrificed my entire life for her. This wound in my heart was the price I had paid for loving without limits. I looked directly into Emily's eyes. My voice was calm but as cold as the winter outside. "I won't lend you the money, Emily. You'll have to figure out that down payment yourselves." "Dad, how can you be so heartless?" Emily stared at me in disbelief. "You've changed. Don't you love me anymore?" "I still love you," I answered without the slightest hesitation. "But this morning I changed my will. This house and every dollar I've saved will be donated to the town's fund for victims of traffic accidents. I've finally learned to say maybe instead of always saying yes to everything you ask." Emily jumped to her feet and stared at me as though I were a complete stranger. She had nothing left to beg for. She turned around and stormed out of the house, slamming the front door behind her. I remained alone in the living room. I wasn't sad. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had finally begun healing myself by refusing to enable their selfishness. I stood up and walked toward the glass cabinet to retrieve my coat. The following day was the state ceremony, honoring distinguished citizens. I wouldn't be attending alone, and I certainly wouldn't be attending with Emily. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of someone very special. The answer on the other end made me smile. What I didn't know was that the state ceremony the next day would bring an even greater surprise, one that was directly connected to Gary's past. The state award ceremony was held in the Grand City Hall with all the dignity the occasion deserved. Soft golden lights bathed the room in a warm glow. As I walked into the main hall, I no longer felt alone. Beside me was Eleanor, the woman I had pulled from the overturned bus on the night of the blizzard. She wore an elegant dress, and her gentle smile was filled with gratitude. We took our seats in the front row reserved for the honored guests. I looked around the ceremonial hall. Emily and Gary were nowhere to be seen. They no longer belonged in the same picture with me. Their absence didn't leave an ache in my heart. The calmness I had found had become a source of inner strength. I had finally realized one simple truth. Sometimes strangers like Eleanor are the very people who remind us of our true worth. When my name was announced, I walked onto the stage to the sound of warm applause. The governor placed the Medal of Honor around my neck. Standing before the microphone, I didn't speak about myself. I didn't dwell on the pain I had endured. Instead, I looked directly into the television cameras and shared a message with everyone watching. Your worth is never determined by whether someone saves you a seat at their table. If they leave you out, build a table of your own. Love should always be given where it is valued. Never lower your self-respect just to beg for acceptance from selfish people, even when they're your own family. I stepped away from the podium with a heart filled with peace. The ache in my left knee was still there, dull and familiar, but now it no longer represented heartbreak. It was proof that I had survived the storm and gone on to live a life worth living. Eleanor and I were going to share a warm dinner at a small neighborhood restaurant. I was ready to begin a new chapter of my life. Free. And finally at peace. We're so glad you stayed with Dad's real-life revenge until the end of this story. Join our community by hitting the like and subscribe buttons to enjoy more gripping, heartfelt family stories. And as always, thank you for being part of this journey with us. I pushed open the door and stepped outside beneath a sky filled with glittering stars. My journey had come to an end, but the lesson about self-respect would remain forever.